It's our privilege today to hear from Dr. John Winkler. Today, Dr. Winkler is going to share what is really quite a private and a poignant story. I invite you to listen carefully as you hear his experience of going through a personal tragedy and the way his residency and family members and others responded. And he continues to be a physician today, many years later, and does this out of compassion and love. And I think that there's a lot of lessons to learn when you sink to the deepest places in your life. You can rise again and give back and find ways to create meaning and joy in those around you. So I encourage you to listen to Dr. Winkler's interview today with that measure of respect and kindness that we would all appreciate if we were sharing something so similar. Thank you. Welcome to the Doctors Making a Difference podcast, where we help physicians to be empowered with the tools they need to be successful in medicine, in finance, and in life. Join us as we highlight doctors and other professionals around the world who are making a difference. John Winkler is here today. I'm delighted that you've agreed to join us today. John, do you mind introducing yourself to our audience today?
For sure. Yeah, I'm Dr. John Winkler. I'm an emergency physician. I've been practicing out of residency for almost 13 years, and just really still love patient care and love lots of parts of emergency medicine. I'm also really passionate about wellness and peer support. I've got my hands in a lot of things that I'm really care about to try to help systems issues for both myself and other clinicians that I work with. So
Yeah, well,
really,
and Dr. Winkler and John and I had the privilege of meeting a couple of years ago. I was taking a ATLS recertification class, and you taught it. I was like, oh, hey, you were there teaching part of that class, and then we had the privilege of reacquainting at a conference earlier this year, and it's just been great to kind of know you and kind of get a little bit of a glimpse into your life, John. And so I appreciate you being willing to come on and talk a little bit about your story.
absolutely. It's been awesome to get to know you too. The ATLS is one of the many things I have my hands in, and it's just really fun to get to know different people in different walks of life and just really enjoy that community. And it was awesome to meet you again at the White Coat Investor Conference and meet your wife and just have some great conversations around stuff that we're both passionate about.
Yeah, well, and I've just like you've discovered, I've found that there's more among physicians, especially, there's just more that connects us than what divides us. There's only so many doctors in the United States, and you talk to people, and there's some that maybe I wouldn't relate to, but the very large majority of people that we just have, there's a lot of things we have in common. Our training, the life that you get to live, and kind of the same struggles and challenges of kind of being in this world of patient care and having life and death decisions in your hands pretty routinely, and then still having to kind of just live a normal life and be a member of the community. And I suppose that's how it's always been for doctors, but I have really enjoyed meeting other doctors, like you and like others around the country. It's really been an enjoyable experience.
Yeah, me too. And when you kind of shed some of those, layers that feel like they do keep us separate, you just realize that, everybody's a human being going through something and everybody is a potential friend and we have a lot that we can really connect and support each other around.
Yeah. Well, talk us through, the story of John Winkler. How did you end up in medicine and in emergency room medicine? And I know you've got some interesting stories along the way that I are pretty important. I'd like to kind of have you lay that framework a little bit to start us out. Tell us how you ended up where you are.
Well, I'm a first generation college graduate and first generation physician. Neither of my parents finished college. They both started. I do have an older brother who did finish college, and he's got his PhD in entomology.
Hmm.
So not a physician, but is a PhD. Um, I didn't know if I wanted to go to college. I got a scholarship to run cross country and track, and ended up just loving the academic side of it too, and ended up thriving. I was very interested in everything about the body, how the body worked. Got into physical therapy. I got very interested in all different pre-health careers. I took a course on different pre-health careers, and I think it was designed to scare people away from being a physician. So I kind of turned away from that for a little bit, but ended up coming back to it over and over and over again. I worked for a physical therapist. I shadowed an orthopedic surgeon. I shadowed an ER doctor. Um, got to see a number of other things in medicine, and it just kept coming back to me. So I decided that, that's what I wanted. And at the time, I was really set on surgery and went to med school thinking that I was going to become a surgeon. I had a son at the time we started medical school. He was 2.5 and ended up having two more kids in medical school. Um, I put everything into becoming a surgeon the first couple years of medical school, and kind of halfway through my third year medical school, I did go through a pretty big burnout and disillusionment with not just surgery but medicine in general.
Hmm.
And then kept coming back to emergency medicine just because of, you know, you're not separating yourself from one part of medicine. You get to see all of it. You still get to do all the procedures. You get to do the fast pace. You get to see the trauma. You get to help be there for kids and for elderly and everything in between. I have a big passion for caring for people who don't have a voice or who are kind of marginalized. So it always just kept coming back to me. And I don't like being on call. I don't like carrying a pager. That was another big thing.
That's a good
Trying to
point.
make some lifestyle changes to be able to have my time off, be my time off, and be able to spend time with my family when I'm off.
That
So
sounds
that's
like
kind
you're a
of the
yeah,
short part
yeah,
of it. But
you're a perfect fit for emergency room. I mean, really, in a lot of ways, because if you don't if you want to help the marginalized, there's lots of ways to do it, but many times, depending on the area, the ER ends up being the place where a lot of those folks receive a lot of the care that they end up getting. And you try to get them tied into more permanent resources, but the reality dictates that sometimes that's the only place they get it. And
yeah,
the ER, that's because I work in a rural area. That's why we met when I was taking an
yeah,
ATLS recertification because I work in the ER as well, and it's hard. It's one of the more challenging parts of my job. However, it's predictable. When I'm on, I'm on, and when I'm not on ER, they'll probably call me to come deliver a baby or something else. But as
yeah.
far as the ER aspect of it, you do get a little bit you get a little bit more of a defined structure to your life. So that's cool.
I also really enjoy, being at the different stages of everybody's life. My grandma, when she was going through a lot of health challenges when before I was even pre-med, she would frequently, you know, be disillusioned with medicine and doctors. And I would hear frequently the story of her sharing with them that she was in the room and she's a person too. And if she could talk to them and that she was right there and just that aspect of,
Hmm.
really listening to a patient and really validating them and being there for them is something that's always resonated with me. And I wasn't always sure if that was compatible with medicine, especially emergency medicine, the fast pace. A lot of the people I'd seen were pretty cynical and kind of rushed through everything. And but some physicians that I watched really did slow down and listen and look people in the eyes and help them be seen and heard as a person. And um, I just felt like that was really important to be able to give someone, no matter how much time you did or didn't have. And that can happen in any setting. It's more challenging in some than others. Fast paced emergency room or, fast paced primary care clinic, it can be a lot more challenging, but
Yeah. So did your grandmother have health experience? Like she felt she was not heard or not listened to when she would go
quite a
to the
bit.
doctor.
Yeah,
Interesting.
quite a bit. Yeah.
So she would have to actually say like I'm a person, listen to me.
Yeah, she did a number of times.
Wow. Well,
Yeah,
what a brave, I mean, that's an example of, I mean, what a cool lady to be able to stand back and be like, hey, listen to me. I have a problem. Don't write me off. And so that obviously had an impact on your life. If you heard her say that and, you still talk about it now, years into your practice.
absolutely. Yeah, I still think about her a lot.
Yeah. Well, so you chose emergency room medicine. It sounds like it was a pretty good fit for your desires, your interests, things like that. And then tell us. I know you told me before we started some of this kind of challenging story that you had. Most people don't have a linear path. You kind of think we sort of assume that you're going to do school and you're going to be in residency and you might be in fellowship and then you're going to be in practice. And it seems like this sort of linear path or an arc, if you want to think about it that way. But your path was certainly not linear, and whatever. I don't want you to have to overshare anything beyond what you're comfortable sharing, John. But I think that there's a powerful story in your experience of how you kind of came to this and what some of the challenges along the way.
Thank you. Yeah, it is a challenging story to share. I've shared different versions of this with different people at different times, and mostly just a very short version. I've shared it in some public settings, some conferences, and yeah, it's a hard story to get through. And I may get emotional. I may, really tense up. So
No,
just
it's
gonna
a
work through it together and just let it kind of become what it is.
yeah, no, and
Yeah.
I think the best interviews, the best people we talk to. This podcast is for physicians, and so I always kind of have to think like, what would with respecting somebody's privacy, but what would I want to share with somebody if I was sitting down if I was sitting across the room with them talking? And I think that
Right.
those kind of discussions are meaningful more than just sort of a canned lecture. And so whatever you're comfortable sharing for sure, John.
Yeah. And I just want to start out by saying, everybody's story is important. It's everybody's story is different. And, what happens to us, the trauma that we go through, you being, going through your cancer, that's part of you, but it doesn't define you.
Right.
Um, and so I just want, whatever people choose to get out of this, I want it to be for them. And if it's going to help them in their life, then great. And if they're going through something hard, just know that there's people who care about you and want to reach out, and hope you don't feel alone in it. Um, so, right before I graduated medical school, we had a baby, like maybe the month before graduation. Ended up matching at emergency medicine at University of Arizona. And about a week before I started my internship, my wife at the time got some belly pain. We thought, okay, it's not a big deal. We had actually had a gap in insurance of about a month until my residency insurance kicked in. Didn't realize it at the time. And then, we put off going in. And the next morning, she was a lot sicker. She had a fever the next morning. And we thought, okay, we should probably go in. We're trying to look for urgent cares. And then, within an hour, she passed out in the shower and couldn't get her up. And belly pain was worse. Called an ambulance. Went to the emergency department. Everything seemed okay at first. Didn't know anybody where we were at. Tried to find a neighbor to watch our three kids, including our baby, and try to sort this out. And went through a very long process in the emergency department, not really finding much. She had a fever. Her blood pressure was okay. She was tachycardic, but nothing else was coming out. She got a CAT scan. She got an ultrasound. They didn't know what was causing it. And since she was about 10 weeks out from having a baby, they thought maybe this was a uterine infection. So they put her on antibiotics, admitted her to an OB who saw her later that night. And the OB came in and noticed she was in septic shock and started adding antibiotics and started thinking, what else could this be?
Mm.
And she wasn't convinced it was endometriitis. So she thought maybe this is an appendix or something, and noticed the belly pain was getting worse, and got the general surgeon on call to take her to the operating room. And they thought it might be her appendix when they got in there and took her appendix out, but the uterus was inflamed. And the surgeon at the time said, I wonder if this is toxic shock.
Mm.
She's got this rash. This is just really weird. And they put her in the ICU, took her appendix out, and she seemed to be doing okay afterwards. So this was nighttime when she got out of surgery. Very, very long day. And then overnight, she just got worse and worse. There was a nurse practitioner on overnight. The ICU doctor wasn't in. And they struggled to get a central line. They struggled to get different procedures that they needed, and her blood pressure kept tanking. They added more pressors. And then I went home to get some of her stuff. And on my way back, I got a call from the ICU doctor that she was intubated and that she was crashing. And
Oh my goodness.
I was just kind of beside myself. I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye. She's on a ventilator. And pretty soon she was on maxed out on pressors, multiple antibiotics. And the ICU doctor said something else is going on here. And he had a thought this is maybe toxic shock too. So at this point, the ICU doctor and the OB thought maybe this wasn't the appendix, maybe this was something else. And they decided to go back to surgery because things were getting worse. And they got a gynonc person to come in and help out. And when they got into surgery, when she's in critical condition and maxed out on pressors, they found a necrotizing uterine infection.
Oh my goodness.
So this was the source of the toxic shock. And this was, you remember, 10 weeks out from delivery. This is a very, very unusual and scary, just kind of crazy case. So she somehow survived the surgery, and we thought she was going to be okay.
So did they remove the uterus, or what
They,
surgery did
they
they
did
do
a
on?
radical hysterectomy. It
Yeah.
was all necrotized. It was just gangrene.
Goodness gracious.
We thought she would make it through that, and there was a maybe half of a day where she was doing better, and then over a period of 24 hours, she got much, much worse again, and she developed a pretty horrible cardiomyopathy. Um, the ICU doctor called in a cardiovascular surgeon from the university where I was about to start my residency, and she came over to this small community hospital to see if you know my wife was a candidate for an LVAD or something else to just kind of help until she could get through this horrible cardiomyopathy and toxic shock. And Brittany coded in when they were trying to move her. She coded probably about 10 times.
Hmm.
The cardiovascular surgeon brought her to the ER. They resuscitated her multiple times, and they had got her to the university in the ICU, and she's still coding. They're getting her back. She's coding again. They're getting her back. She's coding again. And the CT surgeon and the ICU doctor come and meet us in the family room. And they said, we don't know if we can get her back. We're trying. We're still doing everything we can. And the cardiovascular surgeon said, would you want me to do ECMO? I don't know if she can survive it. I don't know if her brain will be intact. There's a risk of stroke. There's all these other risks. Do you want me to try it? And I said, well, she's dead anyway, unless we try it. So just try it.
Right.
And so they tried ECMO, arteriovenous femoral, and her femoral artery just dissected. They
Hmm.
couldn't get it. They couldn't get it. And asked me again, do you want me to continue trying on another vessel? And you know, just remember, this is so unusual to have a cardiovascular surgeon available in this situation. She said, do you want me to cannulate her aorta? And I said, I didn't know you could do that. And she's like, yeah, I'll do a thoracotomy and we'll cannulate her aorta
Hmm.
and do ECMO that way. And so she did it. And somehow Brittany survived that. At least her body did. We didn't know. Is she brain dead? Does she have a severe anoxic brain injury? What's the outcome going to be? Have no idea. So she's got an open chest with ECMO. Her aorta is cannulated, and her, chest is just filled with blood. She's got a dissected femoral artery, and just have no idea what's going to happen.
Hmm.
And so just sitting there with no idea what to do, and the nurse who's on the ECMO team in the PICU ended up being the partner of one of the doctors in my residency. And he just gave me a big hug. He told everybody in my residency,
So they
told my
knew.
program director,
Hmm.
the department chair. One of my good friends I actually work with at the hospital I'm at now, he was on call that night. He was 2 years ahead of me in that residency, and he was just wondering what is going on. What are they doing? There's this crazy code. They're just going for hours and hours. And so pretty soon my entire residency knew. They're just flocking into the ICU, and I'm just overwhelmed, just devastated. Like, what do I even do? And so my someone brings my kids there, and my program director comes about the same time that my kids come. I've got two little kids, a 6-year old and a 3-year old and a new baby, and talking to my residency director, trying to tell him what's going on. And I just remember trying to have a conversation with the kids, like, what's going to happen? What's going on with mom? And I try to tell them that her body's alive, but her brain might be dead, but we don't know. And that we're just going to pray and just break down sobbing. And just the amazing response from our residency just flocked around us, and they just kind of held us in that situation. This is a week before residency.
Right, you're starting your intern
I had no
year a
idea what
week
to do, much
prior.
less if I'm going to start or not, But we don't have health insurance for her because I hadn't started residency yet, and you need health insurance. You have to have a job to have health insurance, and we had that gap between medical school and residency. I felt like I needed to start not just for that, but to make a life for me and the kids. And I didn't know if I'd get a second chance to start later in a year or two once we figured out what would even happen. So with this huge rally of people around us, we had those difficult conversations of do I start or do I not? And I had a conversation with my residency director, Dr. Keim, and he said, if you start, you need to be a resident, and I need you to do everything that a resident does. And I committed to do that, and my family committed to taking care of my wife in this situation and the kids, and our church rallied around us. Other people rallied around us, like residency classmates and friends, and we were somehow able to walk through this crazy situation. So I'll
That's
just take
really,
a pause there and
yeah.
let some of that sink in. That's a lot.
Well, it's a lot, and it's just one of those stories that you can, we can read stories from other people, and all of us can experience these really life changing, difficult things in our life, but it's just so different when it's your story. When you can't believe you've seen it on the outside as a student or as a resident, you know that this kind of stuff can happen, and then suddenly it's right there. It's you. It's in your face in your life, and it's just I just can't even imagine what that felt like in that moment. I'm so thankful you had people. Your residency was supportive, and your church members and your family. Everybody rallied, but it was still a very unexpected, very challenging situation. Did your wife, as she went through that process and was on ECMO, did she stay in that state for a prolonged period of time, or how did that unfold?
So everything was just touch and go. She did very, very well on ECMO, but the question was, is all the other organs are they gonna be okay? She went through multiple episodes of different infections, ventilator associated pneumonia. She had a perinephric abscess. She ended up going on um, dialysis. She had some pretty bad injuries to her toes from the femoral artery dissection. She was able to get a arterial bypass, um, and somehow her organs all came back over a period of about a month.
Hmm.
They ended up weaning her off the ECMO, weaning her off the ventilator, and she had the clot removed from her chest, and her lungs expanded, and her heart started beating on its own.
Hmm.
And then, got better. She was able to come off the ECMO. It took a few weeks and a couple of episodes of getting through sepsis and getting through other difficulties, but she came off the ECMO, and she ended up getting a trach and a peg. There were a number of moments where we thought, okay, there might be some purposeful neurologic stuff where she'd look at people, or she'd smile. Lots of the nursing staff and some of the physicians were really encouraging, hopeful that she might have some meaningful neurologic activity and that she might be able to have a meaningful life. And none of the neurologists that saw her were convinced that these were um, purposeful movements, and they signed off pretty quickly
Oh
after
goodness.
doing CAT scan and EEG. She had some pretty severe brain swelling. Her EEG showed a severe metabolic encephalopathy. They thought it from all the infections or from the swelling from her brain from the anoxic brain injury. So it was just really hard to tell. So we're just kind of hoping against hope that something that would come back, that she's in there. But there's all these little moments where it's like something's in there, she's in there. We think so, but we're not sure. So it's just really challenging. She ended up going to an LTAC, and the the ICU doctor that took care of us in the community hospital chose to be that physician who was going to receive her
Mm.
and take care of her. Um, and so that lasted a couple of days, and then she got sepsis again and ended up back at the university. And then we decided to make a really hard decision. I'm in Tucson, and all of our families in Colorado and Denver. Um, we can have people fly back and forth and try to help out with the kids and take care of Brittany while I'm doing residency, or we can find a solution that's a little more tenable. So we were looking at rehabs around the country, and we looked at Barrows in Phoenix. We looked at Craig in Denver. We looked at a number of others because there just wasn't good PM&R and anything really in-depth rehab in Tucson at the time.
Hmm.
Um, so we ended up flying her to Denver. We found an LTAC that would take her that um, had a number of PM&R docs that rotated her from Craig, just hoping that she might get some neurologic function back. And so it was pretty amazing that everybody kind of chipped in to fly her up there. We had a lot of family and friends who helped us out, and we flew her up there just outside of insurance, and she was accepted at this LTAC.
All right. So yeah, throughout all this, I'm just kind of, which is not even, of course, not even the most devastating part of the story, but the practicality is you were between insurances because of the schooling and this and the shift to residency. Um, and so all this time she doesn't have insurance during any of this. Is that correct?
So the first day in the hospital, she did qualify for Medicaid because I didn't have a job at that point. And then pretty soon my residency insurance kicked in because I chose to start residency.
And then she
So
was able to benefit from that.
yeah,
Okay. I mean,
yeah,
that's one of those challenging things as we'll get into maybe the financial part of this, but what a,
it's a huge part of it. Yeah,
huge part of
it's
it because
part of the anxiety too of how do we figure this out? What do we do? What life decisions do we make? And it
yeah,
was the right decision. It's pretty amazing that I was even allowed to start residency in that situation.
it was. So you were back in Tucson in residency. She's at the LTAC up there close to some of your family members
In
um,
Denver,
in Denver being cared for by a caring team. And then how long did that go on?
it went on for almost a year.
About a year.
My kids actually moved up to Denver. My sister-in-law took a year off of school and watched them along with my parents and my wife's parents. And so these three kids were passed around while I was doing residency, all alone in Tucson and flying up to Denver on any day off that I had. And we had a couple of vacations a year, and they moved my schedule around so that I could come up during the most critical moments and not miss any residency.
Hmm.
But I had to commit. I'm a resident. I got to do this. When I was doing my trauma rotation and ICU rotations, you're working 30 hours. You have 4 days off a month, and I'd fly up for my one day off and fly right back and go back to it.
Another little sidebar on this. How did your mental health handle this? Because obviously, you're being a resident, being an intern is a big load for anybody. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a lot, and then you have this event that really would crush most people. To have your wife and she's gone from being your healthy wife and celebrating the birth of a new child to intubated without getting to say goodbye, just all of a sudden. And then
yeah.
she's in this kind of chronic state of trying to rehabilitate, and you don't know the long and short of it. And you don't know her neurologic potential. I mean, how did you kind of juggle all
Mm.
that?
I still have no idea. I felt broken. I felt devastated. I felt in a rough place. But I also opened myself up to friends and people, and at church, at residency. I love being a doctor. Focusing on other people's problems was just amazing to me. Like other people have problems too. I don't care if it's just a bad day. I don't care if it's, something you're worried about. I don't care if it's, an illness that sure it's not even close to as dangerous or as scary as what we were going through, but it was real and it really helped me to get my mind off of me. Um, just opening myself up to friendships with people in our residency, doing things with them, exercising. Yeah, there was lots of parts of it that I didn't handle well, but um, that really kind of kept me grounded. I think it's that community of people who care about you, and you care about them, and you can give something back, and you can help other people, and get your mind off things.
Yeah. Well, it's this, all of us, I've shared some of my own health journey. Everybody's is so different. And when you take about, your wife's experience was at such a scale that most people will never experience something like that with one of their family members. And it's just, it's interesting to reflect, John, that, through that, you still chose medicine. You still chose to be in this role of healer, and you couldn't have done it alone. You had to have family and friends and residency
Mm-hmm.
members and church members and all these other folks that kind of were your network. And it sounds like that was one of the keys to success in that time, is to let other people help you, even though it's sometimes hard to let other people help you. You had to, and it sounds like that was a great source of strength for you during that time.
It's pretty humbling to need help, much less to accept it. And talking with you with some of your health challenges that you've been through, like I'm sure you get that. It's not fun to be the one needing help.
No, no, it's not. It's much. We'd all. You went into medicine because you want to help people, and it's humbling.
Yeah.
It's almost. I almost, when I had some of my health stuff, I almost felt like guilty for asking for help, or guilty for having a
Yeah.
health problem, which is illogical to feel that, but I felt it, and I think
Yeah.
sometimes in medicine you've kind of got this. You don't want every conversation to be about you. You want the conversation to be about the person who's coming to you for help, and so you have to kind of help people
Hmm.
reframe and understand that you're human too, but we're here to talk about your problems, and it is kind of a difficult
Exactly.
road to walk.
And there
Well,
is a lot of guilt when you feel like you can't show up and be, you know, there for someone that you think needs you, or that you have this calling of being a physician, and you can't show up in the way you want to because of whatever health challenges you're going through.
yeah. Well, I want to come back to your wife's story. I know you shared with me that she did eventually pass away, but I want to know how long did she live in that state?
It was a little over a year, so she went through a whole year. She um, failed to progress neurologically, didn't ever follow any commands in physical therapy, felt like they couldn't work with her, and pretty quickly people signed off. Kind of felt abandoned, honestly.
Mm,
People just kind of didn't really want to talk to us or deal with us, and ended up getting her on social security disability and in long-term care, where it was just I don't want to say a disaster, but it was heartbreaking. Long-term care is challenging for anybody, and having a family member in there who is previously young and healthy and has kids, and it's so hard. So I just have this really soft place in my heart for people who are in long-term care, or who have family members in long-term care. She got a number of infections. She had a trach and a peg, and never was able to do anything on her own. And a little over a year later, she got aspiration pneumonia and a pretty severe case of urosepsis, and she ended up back up in the ICU a little over almost exactly a year later, and made a very difficult decision to let her go,
yeah,
to turn off all the life support. And it wasn't quick. It took almost a day, but she passed away a week, a year and a week after her original incident. And so,
man. Well, John, I can't thank you enough for sharing that story. I think it's personal. I can tell it's, I mean, of course it's deeply meaningful, and it evokes those emotions of that time. And I want to reflect on one thing you said, which is interesting. And in the moment when something happens, it's the emergency, the crisis, all hands are on deck. We want to do everything. And it is hard
mhm.
when you see people who end up in a crisis of some type, and then they end up in long-term care, and they say, I need long-term needs to be met, and you don't know the rehabilitation potential and all these things that we talk about on the medicine side,
Yeah,
but to be on the receiving end of that, like you say, you've got a lot of compassion for people who are in that setting, because there's so much uncertainty, And it's not like the people who are in that would have
Mhm.
chosen that. Sometimes people have done things foolish that put
No,
themselves in harm's way, but very often it's just the circumstances of life that end up in a situation which is really challenging. And boy, people deserve our greatest compassion in those moments, because obviously it's
yeah,
really challenging for anybody that's going through that.
that's kind of one thing that I come back to over and over again is that sense of compassion and sense of empathy, putting myself in someone else's shoes. Like you don't want to do it too much. You got to have some distance. You don't want to get into transference and countertransference, but it is really important to see things from someone else's shoes.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate you sharing it. Like I said, John, this is an experience that I think will have left an indelible mark on your life, but would have crushed a lot of people. And I suppose if you hadn't had the family and friends and residency and that supportive network, it may have crushed you as well. But I just think that is wonderful that your people, and especially in kind of a new crowd down in Tucson where you had just moved and you were just there for residency, they rallied to your cause and helped you through what was one of the most challenging things any person could ever experience.
Yeah, it's still pretty amazing, and I still have just think of them a lot. They're like my family.
Oh yeah.
Um, I've gone through different stages since then, and definitely have felt crushed, not just in that moment, but many stages of my journey since then. After residency, I worked all nights for a long time, and I love the people at the hospital that I worked with. They became very close to, but in a different way. Um, and but on night shift, I felt very isolated, and that was probably a really dark moment for me. Um, when you are isolated, things are a lot harder. And I just want to really speak to that too. When you don't have that ability to connect with family and friends and get that support you need, things do feel a lot darker and you do feel crushed.
Oh yeah. No, we have to have each other. When you're going through challenging times, I think that's one of the key things we learn is that we have to. We're people are social creatures. We have to have each other,
Yeah.
and none of us can deal without that. Before we hit record, we talked a little bit about ways to deal with stress, and you shared a responder stress continuum, and I wondered if you would be willing to kind of talk about that a little bit, because you work in emergency medicine, you deal
Yeah.
with stress every day, from the family, from first responders, from the nursing staff. And then also, personally, you've experienced, what anybody would say was the highest level of stress and trauma in your own life. So, do you mind sharing a little bit about that with our audience?
Yeah. Just kind of as a background, I got very interested in everything mental health through this. I personally went through a lot of counseling. I got remarried my chief year, so a couple years later, um, and went through a lot of really good things and hard things with this step family. And we've just done counseling our whole marriage since we've been remarried. We have our three kids from first marriage and three kids together, and we've spent a lot of time and energy and money on counseling. And mental health is just really important. I got very interested in doing peer support at work, wellness, everything wellness, getting through all of these things, but also the stresses of night shift, the emergency department. I did a number of different courses around wellness and peer support, first with fire departments, and then with Dr. Sarah Metz, who runs a PhD program for first responders in first responder psychology and PTSD. Um, and so Dr. Metz first introduced me to the stress continuum when I took one of her courses. And it's made by the Navy. It talks about the spectrum of um, green, yellow, orange, and red. And those correspond to green being you're ready, you're healthy physically and mentally. Yellow, you have some stressors, some injuries, but you can function. Orange, you're really starting to struggle physically and mentally with some wounds that you're going through, some ongoing um, hurts that haven't been healed or addressed. And then red is when you're just really in an awful place. That part you talk about being crushed, just feeling like you're in a dark spot and you don't know how to get out. Um, and having a conversation around that, like how do you help yourself? When do you need help? When is it okay to reach out and get help? Having this normalized conversation around, just because I'm going through something hard, does that mean I have a mental illness? Can you or can't you talk about it? And I would say for the majority of human beings, we all go through hard things. And it doesn't mean we're mentally ill or we have a mental health diagnosis. It just means we're going through something hard. Having being able to get help in a confidential way that will help you continue to be ready and show up for yourself, your family, your patients is really important. There's a lot of conversation around this nationally, especially after Lorna Breen and COVID. And there's the Lorna Breen Foundation. And it's a really important conversation of how do you help yourself? When do you get help? When's it okay to get help? And how do you protect yourself in that situation to make sure that, it keeps you and your career and your family safe and your patients safe too.
Yeah, I will put that in the show notes. I think it's like I've come across that myself somewhat, but John, it sounds like you've been actively engaged in this for years because you've lived the experience and you work, with other people who are kind of going through that. And I think for every one of us, it's good to step back and say, "Am I in the green or the yellow or the
Mm-hmm.
orange or the red?" And if you're starting to get to where you're orange or red, a lot of times people need that outside help. It's not always just something
Yeah.
you can think your way through and be like, well, if I just have a positive attitude, I'll be okay. Because if you get to the red zone on that area, a lot of people find themselves in crisis and really don't know where to turn. And we see
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people who are in healthcare who go through, commit suicide or they leave their
Yeah.
career altogether, but they don't leave joyfully. They leave because they're crushed. And so I think that's a very
Mm-hmm.
important conversation.
It really is. If we all get different wounds every day. We all have our stressors. We all have our hard patients. We all have our devastating cases. We have our stressors at home too with, whatever we're dealing with at home. Um, we have, just normal wear and tear of everyday life. It can create wounds. If you don't take care of them, they fester and they get worse. I think as physicians, we're really bad about taking care of ourselves. And even though we can tell other people to take good care of themselves, we don't do it for ourselves as well.
That's important. So what would
Yeah.
you tell somebody who's going through a hard time? Maybe they haven't gone through the same level of devastation, with a spouse like what you did, but maybe someone is in training or they're in practice now, and they are saying, "I think I might be in that orange or red zone. I don't feel okay anymore. I feel burned out or angry, stressed all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I can't relax. Nothing seems to bring me joy." What would you tell someone that is headed toward that? What kind of help do they need, and how would you advise them to start?
It's first of all, it's so hard to recognize it. And second of all, it's really hard to talk about it for fear of repercussions and creating a culture of safety where you can recognize it and talk about it and not be worried that it's going to cause worse problems for you or for other people by talking about it. And that's really what I hope has come out of, the last 5, 10 years. I think, medicine is really slow at adopting this, whereas police and fire have done this many years ago. We got to normalize talking about it and going to somebody. If you don't feel comfortable going to someone at work or in your family, find somebody confidential to talk to. Find somebody that has nothing to do with your work. Um, if you can talk to somebody, um, can kind of test the waters and see how they're going to respond. And if someone's been through something, it can be easier to share. If someone's a counselor or has been around um, that world, then they may have more normalized language to make it easier to talk about. But the most important thing is to not get stuck in it and not isolate and not let it get worse, let it fester, because the worst thing possible that you could do is isolate to the point of you can't handle it and it's suicide or it's something else awful that happens, substance abuse.
Hmm.
That's a pretty dark road without getting help,
Yeah.
and
Well,
it is much worse than getting help.
I think I agree with what you're saying. It seems like there's more national attention on this. Most states like have resources where it's either through the state medical board or through your specialty board. I know in Idaho the Idaho Academy of Family Physicians and the state medical board, they have some resources like that that people can reach out to. There's a lot of, and I think almost every state has something like that where if you say, I need
Yeah.
some confidential help, it can't be somebody that I work with in my place of business. You're worried about repercussions, even if that's not realistic that people would judge you, but you might feel that that's the case. There are resources out there, and I think there's a lot of compassion. And as I talk to physicians on this podcast, I feel like I've come across this story. Other people that have experienced the trauma, they've experienced things where they need to talk to other people who've kind of been through something similar, and there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
coaching services. There's a lot of stuff that I think people recognize, and when you look at especially physicians, there just aren't that many doctors in the United States relative to our population. Last time I looked, there was just over 1 million licensed physicians in the United States, which is for a large country, that's just not that many. And so reaching out to a peer, a colleague, or one of these support networks, I think, can be life saving for people for sure.
It definitely can. And I think all those resources are amazing. Um, you know, I think it's also, there's a place for that confidential out of pocket going to somebody that's not going to give you a mental health diagnosis because you're going through a hard life challenges or because wounds have built up. There's definitely people who do, have diagnosable mental illnesses that need that. But I think the majority of people who go through hard things don't need a label. They don't need the stigma that goes with it. We're destigmatizing a lot of these conversations, um, especially with state medical boards and hospital credentialing, and taking a lot of invasive questions off of those licensing or credentialing things. So there's a place for both, and I think it's amazing that there's such a turnaround in that in a support network. Um, so
No, I think that's wonderful. Well, so John, shift gears with me just for a second here as we kind of wrap up.
yeah.
You have stayed in medicine, despite this really bumpy beginning, and now you're years into it. You mentioned you were able to remarry and have a split. You have more children. You and your wife today have, you said, three
Mhm.
additional children, and you've chosen to stay the course and stay in medicine. And so I'm just interested in your perspective today. Why do you still work in medicine, and how did you find your way to stay in that, both practically from the need to take care of patients, and then financially as you take care of your life. You obviously had a real challenging, bumpy start to your career.
This is a great conversation. This probably can be a whole podcast, but
Right.
um, yeah. So I think for me, like just that joy of interacting with patients and seeing them for who they are, helping them being seen and known, just that real deep connection with them. I'm really passionate about people going through recovery for substance abuse. I had a patient that was coming in for an abscess from injections and just really, really scared of an IND. And I had some extra time, and in the middle of the night, it wasn't too busy, and just really walked him through it. And we put some numbing medicine on it and got them through it. And I'll never forget this, but the patient just paused and started just sobbing and said, "Thank you for treating me like a human being."
Hmm.
I had another case also in the middle of the night where an alcoholic who was, coming in multiple times a week that it's very hard to deal with. We had a moment where I just paused and I said, you know, how did you become an alcoholic? What happened? And he said, well, my sister got hit by a car and I just started drinking. And we just talked for like 15 minutes and he says, I just can't stop reliving that moment. He never had a chance to get help.
Hmm.
Have never had a chance to talk to anybody about it. And, you know, seeing people as human beings, having them feel like they're seen and heard and that they matter, that their life matters, what happens with them matters, that their backstory matters. It's just really important to me that
Well,
they
and
have
it's
someone who's going to show up for them.
It's like what your grandma said, kind of bringing this full circle.
Is
Listen to me, I'm a
mm,
person. Listen to me, I'm human.
yeah.
And I think that story is that's a story we all get to live, and it's important to recognize when people are coming, and that's a human being, and maybe they're making rotten choices, and maybe they're not in a good place in their life, but we don't want to judge people permanently based on
Mm,
temporary circumstances. And people can change. Some people aren't
yeah.
going to be changing for a long time, but some of them really can change if you just get down to the core of what's going on. And so I agree with you, John. For me, that's why I'm still in medicine. I need to earn a living, but I could probably earn a living doing other things. I
Hmm.
like medicine because you get to help people and you meet them where they're at and make those little moments. The life is made up of little moments, and in those moments where you get to help somebody along their way, it really is one of the joyful parts about being a doctor.
Really is. And honestly, there's nothing that I enjoy more than being a doctor. For work, there's plenty of hats that I wear, plenty of things that I love to do that aren't that, like the deep connection with people I can get other places. I do get other places. But that chance to be with someone in their most vulnerable, scared situation, in dark moments and scary moments, life-threatening moments, moments where, they're just not, they have nowhere else to go. That's really just a kind of a sacred space for me.
Yeah, I agree with
And I
you.
really do enjoy it. And I love the procedures. I love the medicine. I love being a doctor, but I also love those moments. And I love taking care of my team, whether it's the nurses I work with, whether it's the hospital, whether it's a big group of physicians that I'm part of, whether it's, people like you that I get to meet at conferences or teaching different classes. Like I love that.
Yeah, no, and I can tell that you love that, John, and it's impressive. And I think others who listen to this, I know I've felt inspired with this because if you think like the gift it is to be able to have that skill set to be able to go help people in their needs, and I can tell you're sincere about it and that you still find joy. And I hope that anyone listening may find that similar level of inspiration. And if you feel like you're breaking and you're somehow in that orange or red zone, get the help because the world still needs you. The world still needs you to be an
Yeah.
excellent physician, and you can't be unless you take care of yourself. But
Yeah.
there's help, and there's ways to find joy in medicine, and Dr. John Winkler has demonstrated that you're living that just, and it's inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Well, John, is our as we wrap this up, I know I wish we could talk for hours because I think we could go on and on about there's so many lessons to learn through this. Are there any parting thoughts you would want to leave with our audience?
Yeah, I would just say that you matter. Your family matters. Your patients matter. What you do matters. I hope that each of you listening can find healing and joy for yourselves, but also be a chance to bring that to all the people around you in medicine, outside of medicine, and just that joy of real deep human connection is what keeps us alive and keeps us going and keeps us happy. And I hope you find healing through that too. The joy in medicine for me is that deep connection. The joy with my family is that deep connection. Um, the joy with the people I work with is that deeper connection. Don't just go through the motions and isolate because that's what leads us to that dark area that keeps us from finding peace and healing and joy in what we do.
Yeah, powerful words, John. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on here, and I look forward to staying in touch in the future. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks for tuning into the Doctors Making a Difference podcast. And thank you for what you do to help your patients and your community. Your work truly helps so many people. We produce this content to help you have the tools you need to stay in medicine and to highlight the amazing work being done by physicians around the world. Please note that while I am a physician, and many of the guests on this program are also physicians or other professionals, the discussions on this podcast do not represent my employer or any professional organizations to which I belong. This podcast is for your information and entertainment only, and should not be taken as professional advice. You should seek appropriate professional advice pertaining to your own situation. Please check out more of our content on our website, doctorsmakingadifference.com. Also, please follow, like, or subscribe on your podcast player or YouTube channel and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps to spread the message. Finally, if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, or if you'd like to nominate someone else to be a guest, please visit the website or email admin@doctorsmakingadifference.com. See you next time.